Okay guys, what we're working on here, the 1998 GMC half-ton four-wheel drive pickup. June of 22, this is a 98, just turned 100,000 miles on this truck. The inside is basically pristine, but the outside has all the typical elements of a truck this age. So part of smoothing up this bedside, we wanted to delete the bed stake holes and the holes where they had some bars and toolbox mounted. So let's go ahead and get those tacked in and smoothed out. With our patches tacked in and our holes filled up, we've got the rest of the bed prepared for the dents that we removed. We're ready to start applying some filler. So we'll start over our weld seams with some fiberglass, and then we'll come back over with some traditional body filler. We finally got her down, identified a few dents we need to address. We'll go ahead and put it in epoxy primer, and then we'll start the bodywork process. Okay, here we are mixing up our epoxy primer. We're using some PPG Epoxy 908. It mixes 1-to-1 with the Epoxy 901 catalyst. Time to go ahead and apply some glazing putty to some of the lighter dings. We went ahead and put some actual body filler on the bigger dent that we had out front. Time to go ahead and move on to a high build primer, PPG Shopline JP202. Put it on, we'll go again with the air guns. This has the 1.8 tip. This particular gun really works well. It puts a lot of material out. The high build is going to be just a little bit thicker. It's a great primer gun. It's what it's designed for. Probably to the point where we can kind of start to see some actual progress. Ready to start block sanding the hood today. Got some new stuff to try out on the project. Got a shipment in from Big Kid Blocks. Pretty excited about them actually. Polycarbonate's kind of the new norm. Anyways, let's get started blocking this. Okay, we made it all the way across with the 180 grit, and it blocked out pretty well. There for round 2, another layer of guide coat. And we'll start with the 220 here. Okay, we got the PPG shop line. Victory Red, it's gonna look awesome. Stir it up, get started. On this one, we'll be spraying with the Jet 4000B, the 1.3 tip on about 24 PSI. So here we are after the last coat of clear. Everything turned out pretty well. Should look pretty decent, especially after we buff it. Here we are kind of midstream on putting some cab corners and rockers in this. Wasn't really too bad so far. Everything's going back together good. Wow. That was what was in there. The cab corner itself wasn't really that bad, but kind of to access that rocker panel, I needed to get that out of the way. Okay, here we've got it welded back in and smoothed down. Time to go ahead and put some fiberglass resin over the top of that seam for a little weatherproofing. Start the body work. Today we start on replacing the driver's side cab corner and rocker panel. These trucks were notorious for rusting all the way up into this area. The rocker doesn't have anything visibly coming through. It's kind of beat up, and just my assumption is it's just about as rusty as this is, and we're doing it, so might as well go through the whole process and knock it out. So we picked up this patch panel from LMC Truck. We've cut it. We don't need the rest of that. And we cut it in this area so that when we weld it back into the truck, we're welding in an area that's got some structural strength, and hopefully we can kind of keep that distortion to a minimum. Wouldn't want to get out here into the middle of this and try to weld all the way down that and expect for it not to pull that panel in 7 different directions. So just use what you need on your patch panels. So this is called a slip-on rocker from LMC. I think the intention is that you can just put it on here and weld it into place. It just doesn't fit that well to me. In this area, the bends just aren't right. But what I decided here is I'm gonna make a nice straight line out of this down into this area that is flat. So I should be able to butt that up, make it work well. And then up here, I couldn't make sense out of what they had in mind here. You'd have to pull the front fender off to access this. I don't know what this hole is for, but it's not an exact match. So my actual rocker is fine up here. And I think I'm just gonna make a cut here and then just go ahead and cut my old out to match and try to work it back in. Well, they had that glued down pretty well. Got her coming our way now. Well, I think we finally got something we can work with here. It's hard to hold the phone and the beast, but I can get it to settle in just about right. I think we're going to be good here. Okay, so I've got the rocker in place now. Went in pretty good. Time to take these welds down, see what we got. I think I can live with that. Okay, so here we are trying to get that driver's side cab corner in, and right here, as opposed to here on the patch, doesn't fit. So this is like the 3rd time I've traced and about to run out of material here. But now we're just hitting here. The curve wasn't quite right to match up and allow that to come up flush. And this panel is from LMC as well. And if this is something that you're dealing with, I mean, that might be an issue you could have. So just a heads up on that. Now we just start the long process of tacking her back in. Raleigh decided he wanted a smooth front and rear bumper. So when we removed the trim, of course you have the holes in your bumper, and you can buy new bumpers. They're not too expensive, only like $150 for each side. But what we've done is just welded in some patches from the back, and then we'll come over with fiberglass. Over here on the front bumper, we've put our fiberglass down over our patches, and then we'll smooth that up, body filler. New bumpers would have been better, but $300 is $300. So after our first initial round of blocking, we started to reveal, areas like this. They're gonna need just a little bit more filler up here on the bed, which doesn't have to be perfect because I think we're gonna put the bed liner up over the cab anyways. We've got some areas there that we need to go ahead and put some putty in on both sides. Here, looking at the passenger bed side, you can see that it basically blocked for us. We found a low spot here and here, and just a little bit over here. So we'll go ahead and put a little more material on that and continue blocking. And so here we are 3 days after we applied the second coat of the 2K primer. Now here is a perfect example of why they say let that stuff sit for 3 to 5 days. Because if you look right down here, you can see these areas where we applied the body filler and that primer shrunk back in. When people talk about shrink back, this is exactly what they're talking about. Now, if we were to have blocked that right after it dried, you would still have that. You would forever have that in your paint job. But we've waited, so when it comes time that we'll block this out, this should all come out straight. Okay, to catch you back up on the bumpers, like I had said earlier, Raleigh welded patches in all of those holes, covered them with fiberglass, and then we epoxy primed both bumpers. After that, we did a kind of a rough block sand and came back over with body filler. So we've blocked these out, and now I'm gonna go ahead and hit them with one more coat of the epoxy primer. And then tomorrow, we'll put some 2K high build primer on them and see if we can block them the rest of the way out. But all in all, they're turning out pretty good. Now our shop line epoxy, the JP375, calls for a 15-minute induction period meaning after you mix the hardener, you need to let that sit for about 15 minutes. So while we do that, I'll just show you this. I'm gonna put my epoxy primer on, and I do pretty often actually use these Harbor Freight guns. You know, if you catch them on sale for $9.99, I keep a couple of them on the shelf and I use them until they don't work very well anymore, and then I throw them in the trash. But honestly, right out of the box, if you clean them, they do a really nice job even with paint projects. Sometimes it just depends on what you're doing, but I want a little smoother finish in that the air Gunza that I've been using with that big 1.8 tip. So I'm gonna use the Harbor Freight gun this time. Okay, so here we are the next evening. We've got our first 2 coats of the 2K primer laid down. Back to that air Gunza with the bigger tip, and it's looking good. Now before we forget, we need to put some seam sealer between our patch panels and our existing body. So to kind of try to clean these lines up, I just tape off the edges. We'll see if we can smear something in there that makes it look a little more finished. It's not super perfect, but it should cover okay. Today's been one of those days where you work all day and it feels like you didn't get much done. But we're getting ready to put this in sealer and it'll sit overnight, and we'll go ahead and shoot the base tomorrow. But I'll tell you guys, the hood on one of these extended cabs is a lot bigger than you realize when you start trying to deal with a little hail damage and try to get it somewhat flat. This one's not perfect. There's some areas that just didn't quite come back right, but honestly, we're gonna go for it. I don't know who's ever gonna crawl up on top of it and make sure it was flat. So getting ready to put it in some sealer, and I'll just tell you, it was a lot of work to get this roof ready and get it to this point. Second coat is on, and I'm super pleased with it. This looks really good. I think the base is gonna lay down nice. And here we are the next morning. Got it wiped back down, tacked off, got our first coat of the Victory Red on. Back to the solder with the base coat. First coat of clear. This is driver's side, obviously. I blocked it out and thought we were ready to paint it. And in the final rounds, I found a dent right here that I did not see in the earlier rounds, and another smaller one back there. Neither one was bad, but better now than later. So we've got this third door we're working on today, and it had a dent in the midsection area there and a couple of rock chips. Man, this truck, there wasn't a straight panel on this truck. It didn't look bad when I started. Once you started trying to block things out, there literally wasn't a straight piece on it. So where we're at now is just, unfortunately, back to Bondo, but we'll get this straightened up in primer, and I've actually already started wet sanding, and we'll kind of check on that process a little later today. Well, this probably took longer than it should have. I think I worked on this most of yesterday and finally got it in primer late today. The dent kind of ran around and it was just odd. But we got the third door straight, got the body work done on the driver's side. I've been working on this thing for 2.5 months on my weekends, and if you're working on one, you might be feeling that same pain. You know, if it's not what you do for a living, it just takes a while. The chemicals and the solvents and the things and the drying times and the shrinking periods, and you just can't bang it out. You know, you can't just hammer it, or you're gonna have results that aren't quite what you were hoping for. Anyways, there sits the bed. I've got the driver's side of it wet sanded, and so I've kind of been wet sanding on some stuff as I waited for some of this other stuff to kind of cure and be ready. Time for a splash of clear. Well, we've moved into the wet sanding process on some of what I've got painted, waiting for some parts and some other things to finish up some of the paint work on the cab. While we do that, this bed's been cleared for, I don't know, maybe even 3 weeks now. I think when I started, I was in long sleeves. Then we went to no sleeves. And here we are, first day of October, back in sleeves. This is taking a while, but you know, it's gonna take however long it takes. There's just no rushing it if you wanna get as good a finish as possible. And if you're like me, a DIY guy, I've had mistakes that I had to correct. That all takes time. But if you stick with it, I think in the end you can pull it off. So here's what we're using today. We do have some of the big kid blocks. This are polycarbonate, 24-inch block, 1/4 inch. So it's not super flexible, but does have enough flex that it's about right for this bed, which is basically straight. The paper that we're using is from Linear Blocking Tools. I started in 800 grit because I had some orange peel. With the 4 coats of clear on there, I have plenty to go ahead and smooth it out. As you can see here, we're already getting a lot of that out. Back to the Linear Blocking Tools paper, I guess the only roll paper that is available for wet sanding in these grits, which it works out super good with a polycarbonate block of your choice. So we have that in 800 and 1200, and then we also have some other 1500 grit paper that we'll go to on the DA before we switch over into 3000 Trizac, 5000 Trizac, and then we'll cut and buff it. This here is by Kovacs. This is their K1500 grit paper. Kovacs is pretty cool. It's not your traditional paper. I think it's latex based. And as opposed to a P1500, this is a K1500. And the K1500 is unique in that it cuts like a 1200 grit, but leaves actually a little bit finer than a 1500 grit scratch. Use it on this foam pad that comes with it. The stuff's super cool and it lasts forever. But when it gets dirty, I mean, you can just simply wipe it off. Keep trucking. Super cool stuff, and it works really good, you know, in here in your edges where you can't get very easily with any kind of a rigid block. Where we're at so far, we've started working some of that orange peel down. You can see got a lot of the bigger sections already flat. Now we'll have to switch to some smaller blocks to get into some of these other areas where it's just not going to be that flat, at least not with my skill level, but it's still extremely flat. When I was talking about using these long blocks and eventually having to switch to something shorter, here's a good example where you can see that that long block is not contacting where this bed begins to roll around. And that's fine because we can still switch over to even a shorter block, or even in the end, we may have to use something like a DuraBlock or a foam block of some sort. This is amplified in that this is, you know, you can clearly see where that boundary is, but it's still super flat. Once we polish it, I really don't think, unless you're being overly critical of what's actually a daily driver, I really don't think you're gonna see it. Polycarbonate blocks are just super straight, and that's what you know, I guess a lot of the super high-end car guys are using to get those mirror finishes. And that's kind of what we're shooting for. You know, we want to do the best we can do, but just to be realistic with myself, I'm really not even capable of the kind of work that I see a lot of these guys doing, but there's no reason not to shoot for it. So we've got the whole bedside done with the 800 grit as well as the other side, but we did manage to get the orange peel out, and so we'll be switching to 1200 and then on to 1500 and on up before we cut and buff. I wanted to show you guys real quick some of the things that you'll battle when you're painting in an environment like this. I mean, most of us don't have a paint booth, and that's okay, because I want to show you that you can still get results out of a shop as dirty as this one even. I want to show you, you know, here's a bug, and if we look in some of the other areas, you're going to see little dirt nibs, and they come from, who knows, they come off the plastic when you spray, they come out of the air, they come wherever. Here we've got, there's just a bit of a sag here. That'll all come out. That's all fixable. That's the neat thing about cutting and buffing your project. As long as you get enough material on there and you know, assuming it's, you know, reasonable, you can get some really nice results, and you don't have to worry about whether or not you can do it. It just takes patience and time. You know, you're gonna have some mistakes that you're gonna have to fix, but that's okay. This door turned out really nice. This is the third door, but even in it, and here you can see a piece of lint, if I can get it to focus. And that's all fixable. So when you're working on your own stuff, don't have a heart attack when you look down and there's some trash in it. You can actually sand your base coat before you put your clear on. That takes care of some of the stuff. And tack between coats on your base too. Anyways, we're making progress. You know what grinds my gears? A, I hate masking. And B, in the thick of it all, you realize you just sealed your stinking tape in there and your wax and grease remover. It only took me 3 different times to get everything I needed out of there. Here we are now with our second coat of base. To catch you back up, prepped to 400 and then used an epoxy sealer. Came over it with the base. Everything was looking good. Got over here, realized I blew some dust out of maybe one of these cracks or one of, the tape. I don't know. And when I went to nib it out, it was actually deep enough that it left some pock marks. Just didn't think I wanted to go with it. So what I've done is use some spot putty here. My question when I got into this situation was, how long can I let my base sit and still be good to go ahead and apply the clear? So I pulled the TDS sheet, and I actually have 24 hours to top coat that with clear. So no reason to fret. It really shouldn't take very long. I should be able to do it this afternoon. Got her unmasked, was able to fix everything I was concerned about on this side. So it was a good move to back up and punt and just be patient. So this side is pretty good. So that's a pretty nice gloss right out of a gun. I don't know if you can see the texture or the lack thereof, but that's with the titanium tip on the Segola, and it's supposed to leave a slick finish as opposed to kind of a factory OEM, and I wanted slick, so super happy with that. Here we are on the bed, buzzed over it with 1,000, then 1,500 grit, and then 3,000 Trizact. So we'll be getting ready to start here in just a second with a host of products that I actually picked up from Big Kid Blocks, and they like the Angel Wax there. We're gonna start with a microfiber pad on a rotary. It's kind of cool, they send a sheet. It kind of gives you the steps and the grits and things that you're gonna need to pull off their system, which is helpful because there's just so many things to keep straight, and just picking a system and sticking with it, I think, is a good first step. So let's get started. I did start with the microfiber pad, and I started on like 1,200 RPMs, and it just wasn't getting the light scratches maybe left from the Trizact. I'm not 100% sure where I got the scratches, but I switched over to just the standard buffing compound and a smaller one on the little mini buffer. But this is after step 1, and it's looking really good. So now we switch over, hit it with the second round of polish, see just how good she gets. After the polishing compound, a lot of time and effort. Those are some nice results. So as far as mini sanders, mini polishers go, I picked the Astro up. I think it was about 75 bucks off Amazon, and it comes with a few things. But what I picked up to go with it, also off Amazon, this 32-piece detail kit, and it came with various backing plates, your microfiber pads, a whole bunch of the polishing pads in all the different sizes to get in these kind of areas. So far so good. Here's something you got to watch or you go broke. You're not going to be able to justify ordering every size disc for every size pad. So just take your pad, you can even take a 6-inch pad, and a pair of scissors, and just cut them to fit. It works just fine. It'll save you a lot of money. Yes, on this OBS truck, one of the areas that just was an absolute pain in the butt was where this trim molding went. And it's just a nightmare to find anything to sand all this with through all the steps that we've been through. And even this area up here, ordering the small polisher is making the finishing work a lot better. I don't think it would replace, trying to get in there with a paint stick or whatever and blocking this all, in your primer stages. But as far as the polishing goes, this is working out pretty good. It doesn't come with one, but you'll still want to go ahead and pick up an interface pad, a 3-inch interface pad, and maybe you want to grab one for your smaller backing pads as well. This will allow me to get in on these tighter radiuses safely. So grab an interface pad too. Okay. Don't let it hit the front truck. Got the front assembled, but we still lack this front fender and door, and I guess also the cab, but it actually sprayed out really nicely. So that cut and buff process shouldn't be as painful as some of the others. The hood came out really nice. I don't have a lot of experience with different compounds, but I can tell you that I don't see one thing wrong with the Angel Wax. The operating table for today consists of all kinds of big kid polycarbonate blocks, the linear blocking tools paper, 3M paper, rotary buffer, mini polisher, 3M pads. This finish is actually pretty nice. This was sprayed with the Segola 4600 Extreme with the titanium cap. I mean, it puts out a really flat finish straight out of the gun. I think more experienced painters can actually even lay it down more flat than this. This is a nice finish. Now here's the difference from here out of the gun, what it looks like after you've cut and buffed it with your polycarbonate block. And you can just see more of a mirror finish. Nothing wrong with this. This is even better. One of the reasons why you would cut and buff, here's the bug again. That'll come out, and then you're gonna have little pieces of trash that pop up. If you paint in a booth, you're gonna have issues sometimes. Start off to chase some of those smaller nibs. This came from big kid blocks. Pretty cool. Just wrap your paper around it. We'll go after those first few nibs. We'll try to get the nasty stuff out of there right away. With the big kid block, they're actually sized so that you have a full sheet of paper here. Fold it in half again, and then you're actually ready to just wrap this around these blocks. So they're thought out with that in mind. With some of the other orange peel that I'd been dealing with earlier in the project, it was much more substantial than this, and I actually started with 600 grit. Flat as this looks, I'm going to start with 2000, and if that would get it, that would speed this whole process up. If it won't get it, we can drop down. Start small and see what happens. We're also not going to fart around with this all day trying to get that 2000 to do it, so if it won't do it, we'll adjust. You can see here after a quick pass with the 2000, it looks like it's going to take care of it. You can see where we stopped. That's how light the peel was. That was pretty quick and relatively painless, so that would speed the compounding process up exponentially if we could lead off with the 2000. One thing about orange peel, you don't want it. When I sprayed a lot of this truck, it had gotten up into the upper 90s here in the Midwest. 96 the day I did that other side. Maybe if I would have used a different reducer. I used slow. I was spraying at about 30 PSI with the clear, and that should have been good. It wasn't. Something wasn't right. The less orange peel, the better, that is for sure. That was a really painstaking process to get all that removed on the passenger side. It didn't take too long, and I decided to go down to the 1200. I do use some of the Endosa paper too, but I don't know if they make anything in these higher grits like the linear blocking tools is currently making. Tried them both. They're both good. The linear blocking paper seems to be a little bit tougher, and one problem you have is getting that paper to come off of these blocks. It wants to stick terribly, and you end up sitting there with a razor blade and your soapy water trying to shave that residue off your block before you can change papers. And the Endosa seems to tear, and it's just not quite as tough. It comes off in little pieces as opposed to where this comes off pretty well. It does still leave the residue, but at least the paper will hold together well enough for you to pull it off. I mean, it's good that the paper sticks, but it sticks a little too well. Tried Goo Gone to get the adhesive off. Don't do that with your polycarbonate. Whatever's in the Goo Gone basically dissolves this polycarbonate. Not super problematic, but it is a thing. You do get a super flat finish with these blocks. I think ultimately it depends on what your end goal is. This isn't a show truck or anything, but for me personally, I try to get better each time I do something, and I'm kind of a tool junkie, so something like a DuraBlock or a paint stick still has its place depending on what it is you're actually going for. And even on this project, even though I was using the polycarbonate throughout, you end up finding places where my body work just wasn't flat enough to get truly flat. And so in the end, I may grab something like a DuraBlock just because you've been working on something with this polycarbonate, working and you realize you're getting pretty thin on your clear. You can grab something that's just a little bit softer. That defect will come on out, and really, I mean, you're splitting hairs at that point. It's flat, and if you have somebody looking that closely at your truck, you might just want to ask them to go look at somebody else's truck. It all has its place. This might be a good place to show you as an example for the sake of demonstration. We'll switch over to this DuraBlock and see if it doesn't just come right out for us. Still got 1200 here, so we got it. and that's still very flat. When we polish that, you're not going to be able to see. You won't know if I used a polycarbonate block or if I switched. Especially as I get down here, even though I'll probably start with a hard block, ultimately, in certain places you'll even use your hand, but in some places a block like this that's just got a little flex and just a little bit of give to it, more forgiving around these types of edges. It takes all kinds of blocks, really. As we move into some of these other areas is when you want to grab a smaller block, and I went with one. The poly blocks, if you don't know, they come in different thicknesses. It's firm, stays flat, and you switch to, I think maybe this is an 1/8, a little more give, just so that it'll fit a panel. So if I say that, so that if you didn't really know what these poly blocks consist of, and then here's an example of even the next size down, you got a whole lot of flex, you know, and you can, as you work, you want to find a block that fits your panel so that you're not just hitting dead center of your block each time and rubbing a flat spot there. So that's the thing with polys, lots of different thicknesses. Got the front fender completed in the 1200. We'll move on down to the door, and that is where we'll kind of switch up blocks. And that leads me back to what I was saying earlier. I just peeled the paper that I had left on this block off, and as you can see, this is that residue I was talking about that's so hard to get off. On my lunch break, I did pick up some of the 3M adhesive remover. We'll give that a shot and see if that simplifies this process. Seems to. That's good, because this was $30 for this quart of adhesive remover. So, well, this is the easiest I've ever removed this. I've tried everything else, mainly because I didn't want to spend 30 bucks for the adhesive remover. I definitely recommend it, because this isn't bad. The 3M adhesive remover is the ticket. Got her looking good. Put our paper on and start down the door. We'll go with this 24-inch big kit block. Here's a nice example of what you'll reveal when you start blocking with a hard block over a surface that looked straight to begin with, and it was. But as you can see, those blocks will really reveal everything and take everything out. It definitely gets it flat. So we're back in the shop, but we went ahead and finished blocking out with our 800, 8 and 1200 is kind of what we've got a mix of over here. Now we'll switch over to the DA sander with the 1500. Here we are switching over to our 3M 1500 dry this time. No more water. We've got our interface pad on here, so it'll fit these panels. Interface pads aren't expensive, and you really need one if you're... So it's time to wipe down the panel after the Trizac. Anna switched and got a clean microfiber. It's important to remember that not all microfibers are created equal. This one's actually not that good of one. This is an example of the chemical guys. It's got the bound edges with silk binding. The ones that I like are from the Rag Company. And they're not cheap, but they're important as you start into the polishing stage, or you're going to be battling scratches the whole time. Okay, now that we've made it through our Trizac, it's time to step over to the 3M Heavy Cut Wool Pad and the Angel Wax Resurrection. Now here's one of the microfiber towels I mentioned earlier from the Rag Company. Now's when you really don't pick up a dirty towel through the whole polishing process, and then, you know, change towels as you change compounds as well. With the majority of our big panels covered with the 9-inch wool pad on the rotary buffer, it's time to do our edge work, and this is where the mini polisher and the 3-inch 3M pad come into play. Now this is the same pad as the big 9-inch pad I was using on the rotary. It's just a lot more compact and easier to get in around your edges. A lot more control when it comes to not burning an edge. It's really easy to burn an edge with the big 9-inch pad. It's a lot to control. You can definitely get a lot more precise with something like this when you start getting in on these edges and, you know, and they're tighter, your jams and stuff like that. So one thing about it, you just always want to make sure your pad is turning off of your panel instead of into your panel.
And there may be times where you can't avoid that, but you really need to be careful when that's going on, or sure enough, you'll burn your paint right off. After finishing our edge work, we've got the cab doors and extended cab ready to move on to the polishing stage. You can see what a nice job the Resurrection does. Angel Wax is a water-based product, so it's super easy to clean up, minimal dusting. Anything you saw flying around outside of, extra compound coming off my pad was the lint that comes out of those new wool pads. But the compound itself is just really clean and easy to work with. Okay, we're finishing this up. I just completed the bed in the second stage of the buffing process with the 3M foam pad and the Angel Wax Regenerate. I think I've said Redemption repeatedly. Redemption is the third and final high polish stage if you choose to go that route. You don't have to. As you can see here, for a daily driver, for something that's not headed to a show, this is a super good finish, super high gloss. So the first step was the Angel Wax Resurrection on the wool pad. Second step, 3M foam pad with the Regenerate. Let's finish this up. We just got a little bit to go and we're done. All right, let's get her out in the sun and have a look. Pretty pleased. Still got to stick that bumper pad down tight, but we are basically done with this dude. Now off to the shop for a lift kit, some tires and wheels. Finally buttoning this thing up. So in the finishing stages, some of the things I wanted to make sure we didn't leave untouched were, the door handles were cracked and broken. Grab some new door handles from LMC Truck. Grab some new mirrors off of Amazon, and we'll see how they work. They weren't too expensive, just a direct replacement. We'll see if they hold up. They look good. Grab new hardware, new rubber stoppers for the gas cap. Just the little stuff. You can't really see here, it's dirty, but we grabbed a new cowl piece, and I don't really remember, I think maybe it was GM online. There was several of them for sale. You had to watch shipping or they got really expensive, but this was still 150 bucks, I think is what that was. But the old one just had really seen better days. So I didn't want to stick an old piece back on after we've done all this work. Grabbed the new lower valance. They had a bumper bracket. Grabbed some new bumper trim. That came from LMC Truck as well, but it really cleaned up the look of this rear bumper, and also a new tailgate handle. Now the door handles, they came from LMC, and I'm really not super happy with them. I don't know if you can see, but they don't fit great. Both sides were this way, and I'll bet we took the driver's side off 6 or 8 times and tried to reposition it. This is what it looks like, but at least they're not broken and they work. And our wiper arms, you can get new ones. They're about 35 bucks a piece. The paint was just coming off of these. They're mechanically fine, so we're gonna hit those with some self-etch and some low gloss paint, freshen them up, stick them back on there. So it's been about a week since we sent the truck off to the shop to get the lift kit put on, tires and wheels. Check this thing out. Here you see it with the lift kit and tires and wheels on, and man, it looks great. This is the Rough Country 4-inch suspension lift. We chose the Thompson Baja Legend EXP tire, and we went with a 295/70/18 on this one. -12 offset. The Rough Country lift was actually pretty involved, about a 2-day deal. I think they say 7 hours on the instructions, but it just isn't going to go that quickly for a lot of you. There is some welding, there's some grinding, but it's worth it. There's more expensive lifts on the market that are arguably better, but there's nothing wrong with the quality of the Rough Country lift.
and it was around $900 as opposed to some of the other ones that were around $2,000. It rides great. I would almost say stock, maybe just a little bit more firm, but not rough or harsh in any way. Steers great. Overall, just super satisfied with the kit and the tire and wheel selection. I went with the Mickey Thompson tire because they were a little bit lighter than some of the other ones that I was looking at. And to avoid changing the gearing and some of the other stuff that you can kind of get into when you start going with big tires, we tried to keep it at around 34 inches, and we tried to watch the rotating weight of the tire. And all in all, I think it's great.
All right, guys, that's going to do it for the build on this 98 OBS. If you watch this whole video, a couple of things, because it was very long. A, you have way too much free time on your hands, and B, thank you very much, guys. Please like and subscribe and catch up with me on whatever I'm building next. Thanks for checking it out. Take care.